Terpenes are one of the most abundant compounds found in nature. There's actually over 30,000 identified terpenes. The majority of them come from plants, but they're also found in fungus, things like insects such as the walking stick and some butterflies, bacteria, and they're even found in marine species like coral. The primary purpose for terpenes is to basically protect plants or help them propagate. When it comes to protection, terpenes themselves are actually kind of bitter and pretty strong to taste when they're concentrated in a plant. So what they do there is deter little herbivores like deer and bunny rabbits from basically eating the plant alive. They also have really pungent aroma properties that can deter certain insects and other herbivores from even getting close to the plant before they even have a chance to chow down. Terpenes help plants propagate by attracting pollinators like bees. In fact, plants can even change their terpene expression or the pungency of their dominant terpenes to attract different pollinators throughout the day. So when you're thinking of the birds and the bees, when it comes to plants, terpenes actually play a pretty significant role, not just in deterring the birds per se, but attracting the bees. Terpenes are used in a bunch of consumer packaged goods from the cosmetic industry. So you have your different fragrances, makeup, toiletries, deodorant, bath bombs, soaps, you name it. There's a ton of terpenes in all of those things. They're also generally GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe by the FDA, and that means that they're used in food, and they vary in their use to make things smell good, taste good, as well as help preserve food and reduce food spoilage. Now, cannabis has a really high amount of terpenes compared to other plants and a massive range of different types of terpenes. And like other plants, these terpenes are basically there to help protect the plant. But what's interesting about cannabis is it's wind-pollinated. So cannabis plant is not pollinated by bees. Instead, the wind carries the pollen from the male plant over up to miles away, and then it ends up finding its way to the female plant. So when it comes to terpenes with cannabis, their primary focus is to protect the plant. And then one day humans decided that this smells really, really good. And throughout the years, actually throughout the millennia, we've come to know terpenes in cannabis as the driving force to the different effects or experiences that we get when we consume this stinky plant. I'm moving around our backyard at the cabin, and as you can see, it's just the end of winter. Spring is upon us, and that means that a lot of these plants behind me that aren't bearing flowers or green leaves, they're actually getting ready to ramp up their terpene production so that they can protect themselves as they get pollinated and propagate and continue their legacy. A lot of growers will tell you that towards the very end of growing, right before harvest, that the terpenes can change drastically in the sense of how the plants smell in their grow room or even outdoors. Now, since the female plant is meant to get pollinated because it wants to produce seeds, this stress can actually change its terpene profile to be very different than what it would actually be in nature. And in some cases can even ramp up terpene production and allow some of these more nuanced terpenes to really shine through, totally changing the aroma profile. And what's awesome is that that terpene profile that's so robust and pungent and possibly unique can actually be essentially encapsulated and preserved by proper dry and cure of the flower, or by creating live resin products by flash freezing the plant before it's even dried. And if you've ever smelled live resin, you know that it is incredibly, incredibly pungent. When we're talking about the effects of cannabis, it's going to vary based off of the terpene profile. Now, what's interesting about terpenes is that when they're by themselves, depending on how they're consumed, they can have different effects than when they're with other terpenes or when they're with really potent compounds like THC. The best way to think about terpenes and THC is the gas pedal. It is the accelerator that's moving you forward. And then the terpenes are the steering wheel, which are going to guide you through this spectrum of experiences that go anywhere from super sedative all the way to incredibly stimulating. But what's interesting about these terpenes is that when they're isolated and by themselves, the experience of aromatherapy or even just inhaling them with a vape pen or something like that could be very different than when they are combined with something like THC. So if you come across a study, say on limonene, and it says that it's calming, or even terpinolene that says that it will help reduce stress, but then you consume cannabis that's really high in limonene or really high in terpinolene and you have that opposite experience, that would be why. And it's also important to understand that with cannabis, you're not dealing with just one or two or a couple terpenes. There are dozens upon dozens of terpenes and other aroma compounds that are all contributing to the totality of the experience, which is the entourage effect. Our memory is actually a huge part as to how we interpret various aroma compounds. And a perfect example of this would be, as a kid, whenever you smelled skunk, you were probably like, ugh, that's gross. But after you started consuming cannabis, all of a sudden now you start thinking of those skunky, gassy aromas, and now you smell roadkill and skunk, and you put the windows down and take a whiff, because now that smell is reminding you of cannabis and it turns something negative into something positive. So this is a perfect example of how aroma compounds, or a bouquet of various aroma compounds, can be interpreted differently based off of your experiences. Now, although there may be a lot of curiosities, let's just say, of how terpenes affect us depending on how they're consumed and what they're consumed with, the best thing that you can do when it comes to terpenes is think about how they make you feel. And whether it's an isolated terpene, or it's an extracted terpene blend, or it's terpenes that are naturally expressed out of wood or flowers or anything else out there, all you have to really do is think about how it makes you feel.